Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. This is Jean Baptiste of the Red Pill Religion slash Escaping Atheism Project, and I'm here with one of my cohorts, Mr. Brass, who is, part of our Facebook group. Um, say hi, Mr. Brass.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be on.
Well, Mr. Brass is a deist. Would you be interested in explaining deism? You don't have to do it simply. We're not on a time limit.
Oh, I prefer to keep things simple. So, in order to not really, so the audience can know, um, a deist, I would say, is someone that recognizes that there is an external creative force behind the universe. We call this external force God. Is that, I would say that's a pretty simple, definition, that we can go with. I mean, obviously, different deists have different ways of explaining these, but if I were to gather around a table with a bunch of them, we could all pretty much agree that this is like the simplest way to think of it. Um,
Well, that goes in line with Judaism and Christianity too. Um, it's something that deists can sit down with those two groups and actually have a common
mhm.
commonality. Um, so deism obviously is an umbrella like theism is. Um,
Well, I mean,
what kind of deist are you?
I would say that, I mean, I would basically put myself as just, I simply say I'm just deist. I mean, there's different branches of it, but I kind of take like what, and I've heard Christian YouTubers that I've checked out, like Inspiring Philosophy. He says he likes to be just called just a Christian. Well, I mean, I just like to call myself just a deist because I think once you apply so many different labels, it becomes confusing to the audience. I would say I'm more inclined to be one of the natural deists, like a classical one. Um, but, you know, I always say that I always hold out, for whatever guides me in my philosophy, in my readings.
So, a classical deist would be the likes of Voltaire, of uh Voltaire is the
Thomas
only one
Paine.
that comes to mind. Who? I'm sorry.
Thomas Paine. Um,
Thomas Paine was a deist? I thought he was an atheist.
no, he was a deist. In fact, if you read Age of Reason, he actually calls out atheists on there as fools.
Oh, really? I
Oh
have to
yeah.
I have to reread The Age of Reason then. I'll
I
probably.
mean, that's what got me in. Like, I know you're probably going to ask about my deism and how I came to this to hold the belief. Um, it was like, the likes of reading guys like Voltaire, Thomas Paine, Thomas Jefferson, the Jefferson Bible. Reading those people, got me into it. It got me intrigued. Um,
Yeah, well, I'm sorry. I'm trying to tweet out on and everything. But
that's fine.
okay. All right. So you know you mentioned the Jefferson Bible, which is one of the things that I think should be required for any young man or woman. Um, yeah,
Hmm.
I've read it several times during you know um, school when I was in public education down in Florida. Sometimes it was required. Sometimes I just went back to it because it was just I liked it. I liked that it was this was it was Thomas Jefferson making a statement, which he purposefully wasn't forthright about what he believed. He there's some things that he says that that atheists say, well, he was obviously clearly an atheist, and then there's other actions and things that he did that makes Christians go, clearly he was a Christian, and then and so on and so forth. I think he
He
did
was a
that.
very complicated man, you could
Yeah,
say.
yeah, but I think he did that more on purpose, so not one group can take the Constitution and everything that he wrote and claim it for their own. He wanted to be, this is me, this is my thoughts, and they were good thoughts, I think.
Well, there's also another thing. It's about history and when Thomas Jefferson was around. Back in his time, I mean, he hung out with atheists. He was not openly against them or nothing. Um, he actually, in fact, said that it didn't bother him at all if someone was an atheist. Um, he, um, he was like from where he was around. There was a lot of Christian deists, you could say. There were people that they believed that the Bible was, a great moral teacher, but they didn't believe that God intervened and stuff like that. That was the kind back then. And when you have people like that, you'll hear them making quotes about Jesus Christ and the Creator God. And, that would sound awfully Christian because, they're taking they're saying that these things are inspirational. I mean, it would be kind of like, in a way, me quoting Richard Dawkins in The God Delusion, which I don't really recommend people reading, but um, it's like if I were to quote from him and I just said, well, this book contains, this sort of moral statement, you could easily come to the conclusion that I'm an atheist, even if I'm not.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's God Delusion is a weird, weird book.
It's, I call it, it's, to me, it's like intellectually dull. I mean, Richard Dawkins is a biologist. He is not a philosopher, as many people have pointed out. And to his credit, he never claimed to be one. But at the same time, he made a bunch of philosophical statements which he could not back up. Um, you know, I would consider it somewhat like if, a young Earth creationist or something, started making biology terms, even though they may have not claimed to be a biologist, they're still going outside their range of field. If that makes sense at all.
Yeah, that does make sense. Well, all right. So, what are some common misconceptions about theism? Because I can list off a few that I see atheists doing. Like, atheists will claim that deism is a form of theism because of the belief in God, which that's them narrowing the definition of theism. Like me, I'm if I was to actually, like any genre of the Enlightenment period, 18th 18th century, early 19th century, it would have to be the supernatural, rational supernaturalism. John Locke, Rene
Yeah.
Descartes, those type of people that actually made pretty good arguments for religion.
Oh yeah. They.
There some
I
deists.
like them.
There are some deists in there. I mean,
You
what's your thoughts on all that?
Well, I mean, I study history. I kind of, I'm really into studying the culture of things. I always find that, fascinating. I really started in the Enlightenment era. It got me thinking about deism because that was a very widely thing back then. There was more deists probably then than there is now. Um, and I would say the common misconception. I mean, for one, deism is theism. Um, Theism is like, as William Lane Craig said, it's the broad view that God exists. Deism it's the belief that God exists. Well, deism, is a category of that. You know, it falls under theism, but it comes down to, has God revealed himself? Um, which, as you know, a deist, well, I mean, you also have to define reveal because there's many thousands of different definitions you can get for reveal.
Well,
You
we,
know,
we we can use the Enlightenment era definitions. I mean that's what I'm using for deism anyway. Because
yeah,
they split up theism and deism, as theism being the belief in God, but believing that God actually gives divine revelations, and then deism
yeah.
be you
Well, I
know
mean, yeah, there's I imagine like, over time that there has been some, words change over time and categories get switched around. Um I would say like a a common misconception, I would say, it kind of comes from both sides. I've known that, as Rich, I don't like bringing up Richard Dawkins again, but I hear this a lot from atheists that deism is pretty much, just watered down theism, while Christians would say that it's, just wanting to be a Christian without having the doctrines.
I mean
Something like that.
I obviously disagree with both interpretations, because it's like, really, you're gonna go that far? Because it's you don't have ritualistic practices, to my knowledge, unless that's changed.
Um,
But unless that's changed, I mean, you could be a Gnostic esoteric person.
um,
there are deists that do that. Oh, go ahead.
yeah. Well, I mean, of course, like with any group, there are differences amongst peoples and their activities. I go to a Unitarian Universalist church myself on occasions. Um, I like the wide variety of views that they allow there. Um, they have many groups of people that I find comforting, and they encourage thinking, reading into these things. And, I've always just been interested in that, and that's how I got into it. Uh, I've also, it's just a bad misrepresentation because, from when I don't know what really bothers me more because I can kind of see, like, a lot of Christians I personally know are pretty much deist. They are deist in the sense, like, they're not really, like, church going. They don't really know the Bible at all, but they have a basic view of God.
Well,
But they just tie that into Jesus.
yeah. I mean, I have I have I've noticed that there's a lot of Christians like that. It's not that it's anything bad. It's just
Oh, it's
as
not bad
as,
at all.
as far as not knowing the Bible. Well, I'm
Yeah,
not really that big on biblical literal that I can type it, but I can't say it. Literal
literalism.
reading the Bible literally. I don't agree
Oh,
with
that's
that.
stupid. Is to do with any ancient text.
Well,
You have to, you have to put it. You have to, I mean, not stupid per se, you know, but you always have to keep in mind that these things were like with any historical document. You have to, like, see how it was written back to those people and put because I studied the Bible and especially the Old Testament because I find it fascinating. Um, there's a lot of things you lose if you take it that route because and you get such a more richer outlook when you do see it. From the standpoint of the people that live there, because you get this cultural feel towards it, if that makes sense.
oh yeah, that totally makes sense. Me, I go to Jewish synagogue every once in a while. They allow it. It's they allow the different faiths to come in, and practice with them. You can go through the liturgy and stuff like that. You go through like Judaism 101,
Mhm.
all the steps to go through that, and learning biblical literal, not biblical literal, biblical Hebrew. It kind of shifted my perception on at least the Old Testament, because it was written to be music. It was written to be musical. Certain dots would mean certain inflections, like certain dots and dashes would mean you trill your voice while you're doing it, and that changes the meaning. The trills, the different pitches of how you're supposed to do it. That all changes the meaning of the sound and of the word. It's a very primal. Um, it wells up some pretty primal feelings, and when you
Yeah.
hear it, it's also the same with biblical Greek. I'm bad Greek Orthodox because I forgot the official name of it, but it works in pretty much the same way. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, like I was saying, not, you know, it's not, I wouldn't say it's stupid, but I think, people that do take the literalistic approach to it are missing out on history, which I find is a sorely lacking thing these days because, I'm a big history fan. I'm a history buff. I study culture. I study philosophy. I delve deeply into these matters of people. Um, so, when I read something like the old, if, I mean, well, to get a little funny side to you, I was actually originally a non denominational Christian for the first 18 years of my life. Um, Later on, I read some I read, some science literature. I read into neuroscience. I read some philosophy. I read the likes of Voltaire. I read Thomas Paine's work, you know, and I just, I kept going deeper and deeper, and I had philosophical issues. And going into the history, learning some of the Hebrew, learning some of the Greek, I just came more to identify more with the deist position. I was never really, I would say, real religious. It hardly ever came up. But, I always had a basic view of God. And I just found that later on in life, when, after I turned around 18 and 19 and continuing my studies, I found that deism just made more sense for me from what I was experiencing.
And I would say that's perfectly fine. I mean, I would say that it's what how the atheists put it. Like when you talk about God, it's like, which God? There's only one God we're talking about here. It's just seen in multiple different ways. There's
Yeah.
multiple different explanations for you know the being, the you know ultimately the mind that is outside of everything, that is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, that's the whole 4,000 gods argument, which is stupid. Um, you know, like the 4,000 gods argument, basically, if I could go saying there is 4,000 gods, you only believe in one of those gods. Therefore, what is the probability that your God is right? Well, the problem with that argument is it makes a huge presuppositional fallacy. It presupposes that all these gods are equal in evidence or that they're equal in merit. Like, when you go back in ancient literature, you find that there's specific gods that are very material beings, that you should see them in nature, and there's plenty of beings that, there's plenty of specific gods where they have to lie within a certain physical constraint in order for them to rationally make sense. So, I mean, it And for another thing, it's like even taking away the philosophical issues with that, it's a blunder in of itself because there's been millions of interpretations of God. If you count polytheist, if you count like all the gods in Hinduism alone, you come to startling millions of gods that people have worshipped. So I mean, it's factually wrong on its front, and it presupposes that the evidence for all these gods is equal when it really isn't. There's specific gods that are material beings that that they live in the natural world that we have to investigate. So I mean, we can rule out those gods. Um,
Well,
so I mean,
I
well,
mean,
we can rule them out. We
can
can rule them out with a good.
we really
We can.
rule out demigods though? I mean, because that's what you're talking about. I mean, because
Well,
if it's a human being with godlike powers, right? You would think
yeah,
that that human
there's
being
multiple
would
different
be
ways.
well, but you would assume that that human being would be able to hide himself or herself from
Yeah, I
human.
mean, if you well think about the numbers of like, you have like you've had like, hundreds of thousands at least, or even more of demigods. You think, one of them eventually of different belief systems, some that were very open to discussing these things. You would think one would, at least by accident, would stop a car with his bare hands or something, or would get hit by a car, but would just stay there.
Well,
Like you see.
I would think that they would still get hurt and stuff. Is just they would heal
Well,
a lot faster, and things that would actually normally kill a human, it just wouldn't.
work for them. I mean,
Yeah.
well, take Hercules for example. That he was a demigod. Um, Hercules, basically was even supposedly stronger than the gods. The only difference really between a demigod and the regular gods came down to birthrights. Um, if you were born, basically you'd have to be a bastard child in order to be a demigod. Like with Zeus and his number of bastard children, which I could be all day listing them. Zeus got around a lot, apparently, from my readings.
They all
Like with,
technically got around a lot. I mean,
yeah. Well, I mean, what's funny is if you actually read it, Hephaestus, I never got the story of Hephaestus. He made all the armor and he was their armor guy. What I've always found funny is like in any literature you read of Hephaestus, like he's apparently this guy that can make weapons that stop the gods. Like he stopped Ares. Like he caught him in a net when he caught Ares cheating on his. We caught Ares and his wife in an affair. So he apparently has this divine power to be able to do other gods like that. And throughout all literature, he's treated like garbage. His Zeus and Hera pretty much disowned him, throwing him out of Olympus. They, you know, all the gods pretty much treat him like a joke. But he has this power. You think in some story that he'd be higher up. I don't know. I just always found it fascinating looking into these things.
yeah. I mean, with Greek mythology, it just seems all different, little gods, the ones that actually, sided with the humans, always got treated like garbage. Because I think Hephaestus was one of the gods that actually would, after
He was like
that
he
he
was a nice,
protected humans. I
yeah,
mean, he wasn't necessarily a nice guy, but he protected humans from the gods essentially.
danger. Yeah, I mean, he was. I believe in Greek mythology. I could be wrong on this, of course, but I believe he's actually the one that made human beings. Like Zeus didn't do that. Because him being the builder god, he built humans out of clay, or I've heard like from that. Um,
I'm not really
and
sure about that because I haven't really studied polytheism in forever.
well, I mean,
Not
well,
not
here's what's
great
funny.
poly.
I've always noticed. Here's what I've always funnily noticed. Like many people before me have noticed this too. But even with the polytheistic religions like Hinduism, or you know, like with Greek mythology or Roman mythology and all that, they all shared a common thing where they had one central god. Like how Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, they all had one central god. They just had God appointing people below him to different positions. So, was like for Zeus was at one point, like, I believe in the end, like almost the end times of Greek mythology, after, Zeus became sort of like the Christian god in a way, where they considered all the stories allegorical of him, and they considered him just this big guiding force. So I mean,
Well, yeah, that's where the term Deus comes from. um,
yeah,
but with polytheism, it they view the mythologies and the stories a little bit differently because it's based
yeah,
on oral tradition. Oral tradition, originally was a way to both entertain and teach. That's why
mhm,
most of the Bible is allegorical because it
yeah,
originated as oral stories passed down through the generations.
mhm,
Same with Christianity too, because before the actual Bible was written, before the
mhm,
Old Testament and New Testament was written, it was
mhm,
all oral stories that over hundreds of years people would write down and
mhm,
collate it into this big. Jordan Peterson calls it the first hyperlinked book, which I really
mhm,
enjoy that because
yeah.
it's so true.
Yeah, I like Jordan Peterson actually. He gets some bad rep by some atheists. I noticed guys like TMM, and some others. They rip into him, but I think my only problem is like he's too much of a thinker. He has like that one of the people that, like, I don't try to say like how they call it, person that's too deep into their own thoughts. Jordan Peterson's always trying to find a meaning behind everything, and to some people that rubs them the wrong way. I personally find him enjoyable. He comes across as very genuine, and he comes across as very much wanting to know the truth behind these things.
Oh yes, absolutely. One of that's definitely a reason why I like Jordan Peterson because I kind of do the same thing, but he's actually professionally paid to find meaning, the meaning behind everything. But his whole entire professional career, it seems, with Maps of Meaning and
Mhm.
all of his talks, including his debates with atheists on Toronto, the Toronto TV network, because
Mhm.
during the whole New Atheism phase, when New Atheism climaxed, I
Mhm.
call it climax point because it started in the 1960s with Anthony
Mhm.
Flew, atheist
Yeah,
opposition, um, and then it
who
spun
became a
on from
deist, by
there.
the way.
Who? Oh, Anthony
Anthony
Flew.
Flew.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He's one of the few atheists that I enjoyed reading, and then when he became a deist, is like that makes sense. I'm actually think Daniel Dennett is going to go from atheist to deist, relatively soon because I've been following his stuff with AI. He's mainly AI programming, and that's one of the scientific fields that I'm interested in because I'm a programmer of
Oh,
sorts.
neat.
It's a
Um,
hobby.
Funny. I never thought of Dennett would be the one that do that. Like, if out of all the four horsemen, I always thought, like, if anyone, funny enough, Sam Harris would be the one, because Sam Harris is into the meditation. He's into the philosophies. He's into all. if anyone was going to become a theist, or at least a theist in any way, I would assume it would have been Harris. But Dennett, I've always
Well,
seen Dennett. No one really thinks about Dennett as much as the other horsemen. Like
well,
Hitchens
no,
was like the
he's.
most famous.
I'm sorry for talking above you,
It's fine.
but no, I mean Denon is the only actual philosopher, the only actual person. He had I think a minor in philosophy and a major in computer science, which
Yeah.
is a field that I am interested in, specifically the AI problems that he's been coming across, as
Yeah.
far as cognition and actually getting robots to see.
Mm-hmm.
Jordan Peterson actually talks about this, the frame
Mm-hmm.
problem. He talked about in one of his lectures, the frame problem being that they tried to get, you know, um, when they tried to get actual robots to see objects, and stuff like
Yeah.
that, they learned that they couldn't, and it's called the frame problem. That's actually Daniel Dennett's, you know, big, thing to fame is his work in AI and AI cognition and stuff like that.
I would say he's probably like, sorry I talk over too, but I would say Dennett is probably the most legitimate out of all of them, out of the four horsemen. He's not as widely known as Dawkins or Harris or Hitchens, especially not Hitchens. But I would say he's more legitimate as an academic than I would say the rest, especially Sam Harris. I despise him in so many ways.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it seems like he would be atheist, but I think he just has, I think he just has too much invested in atheism. He makes
I
too much
think so
money.
too.
He makes too much money off of it for him to actually openly say he's a deist. Whereas, you know, with the work that Dennett is actually doing, with because the AI stuff he's doing is
Mhm.
actually helping, psychology out and
Yeah.
helping us actually understand cognition and stuff like that. And
Mhm.
he's been running into a lot of problems that it's just, it
Yeah.
that's just my opinion on actually, because I like to read a lot and I read
Yeah. So same
history.
here. I got a whole computer worth of it.
Yeah, I mean, I always found Dennett though to be the most easily readable,
Hmm.
because it's there's not a lot of double think. Um,
Yeah.
and and
I
and
actually got his book Consciousness Explained. So far, it's a pretty interesting read.
yeah, yeah, it is. It's I enjoyed that book.
Mhm. He comes to conclusions that so a lot of philosophers pretty much laugh at. He believes that consciousness is ultimately an illusion, which you know to me personally, I say that I'm rather agnostic towards what consciousness is because there is so many ideas about what it is. Like legitimately, I've heard consciousness be described as everything, and I've described it being as nothing. So when that's your framework, you know that we have nothing. We know nothing about consciousness.
Well, yeah,
On
because you can't really study consciousness because we can't pinpoint where consciousness actually happens in the brain.
a,
We can see just before we make a decision, what we call our subconscious actually makes there's some activity in the subconscious part of the brain just before you make a decision. But and
Mhm.
a lot of atheists go, well, that's proof that there's no free will. And it's like, no, that's proof that, consciousness exists outside of the human, outside of the tissue, in my opinion. You know, it
It could also just prove that we have muscle fibers, and our muscles take a certain time. There's been multiple criticisms of that. I know what you're referencing is the Libet study, and I like to point out to atheists that Libet himself was a big supporter of free will. You know, and he always interpreted his own work as, he believed that you could cancel it out, like the subconscious, puts it in there, but you can cancel it. He was a big proponent for free will. So I find it sort of funny that the atheists are using his work as some point when even he didn't interpret it as that.
Well, the atheists that do make that you do use that as proof, um, is usually aren't they're not really well read. I wouldn't say well
No.
educated, but well read because I don't really have a formal education. I just read a lot.
Mm.
I don't think I'm an intellectual or anything. I just have opinions. But with some of the bigger YouTubers like Armored Skeptic, which only
Mm.
got big because of Gamergate and because he got a really well loved you know
Well,
um
he invented a style too. I
girlfriend.
believe he was the first person that did the whole picture. The multiple atheists and some theists like Levitical. They have that style where they have a cartoon picture placed in front of the screen instead of showing their face. Sort of like what I do. I believe he kind of made that style, his own, and he kind of innovated that.
Yeah, I mean, I get why people actually watch his videos. They're slightly entertaining, but it's just like the whole wanting to yell at him that you're wrong about that. When he
Yeah,
starts talking about God and stuff like that, it's just like,
I believe he had one. I believe modernism was something he did a video on that really got a lot of hate by atheists and plenty of other people.
well, do you follow Dr. Lehman, my dude?
No, I do not. I would be interested in. I heard the name before, but I haven't got into it.
Well, Dr. Lehman is a somewhere in Europe. He's a social scientist, and he actually explained why Armored Skeptic was wrong completely about this whole entire concept of postmodernism. I mean, he has some pretty good videos. I watch a lot of atheist content, and I make a lot of comments criticizing that atheist content, and
Oh
some
yeah, I
are
mean,
like,
as you know me, I've posted in the Facebook post multiple times that I call out atheists on BS history, BS philosophy. I really call them out on all their stuff. Although we do find some common grounds on certain topics, we do, like, I tend to be against them on an intellectual level.
well, I'm more against the new atheist than the classical atheist.
Well, I mean, that's
I
what I
think
mean.
I think the
I think we
classical
both can admit that, not like, to any atheist that might be watching this, hashtag not all. Um, you know, you know, um, I believe that's a big misconception. Like, they think that we're like, guys like us, and even guys like Max, they have this conception that we're against all atheists. No, I like to say we're against a specific breed of atheist. It's sort of like saying, you're against a certain sect of black people that happen to be the criminals. Um, Saying that you're against those specific people does not make you a racist. You're not against them as people, you're against them for their actions.
I'm kind of against all people as criminals. Not. I'm not talking about just the
Well, I
general
mean, I'm just giving an analogy.
criminality, because technically
Yeah.
every single one of us breaks some kind of law
Oh,
every
yeah.
day. But
Yeah, of
it's
course. At least a misdemeanor.
the organized ones, the ones that are actually organized to I haven't had any good um I don't have any good things to say about them.
Oh, no one. Like, I have some atheist friends, and we get along pretty good. We find some common ground, which, I'm very diverse in my friendships. I have pagan friends, I have Jewish friends, I have Muslim friends, I have Christian friends. You know, I'm very diverse in who I hang out with, and sure, they all try to convert me. Um, but I ultimately see them as they're good people, which I think a lot of the new atheists, I think they're intellectually dull to me. They repeat mantras, they repeat like slogans and catchphrases that Hitchens said, and they weren't even original when Hitchens first said them. They they tend to make stupid philosophical things. I mean, there was this one time, just recently actually, where I was talking to Jesus Mythicist, and he had issued a challenge, a completely historically illiterate challenge, where he said, try to read all the gospels of Jesus's life and try to come with a coherent story, you know. And I issued another challenge, and I said, read all of the autobiographies written of George Washington, and within 100 years after he died, and try to come up with a coherent story from it. And an atheist commented below me and said, "No one is claiming, no one is claiming that George Washington stories are a word of God. False dichotomy." And I really chewed this guy out. Like I actually feel bad about it because I chewed him out so bad for that. I said, for one, a false dichotomy, or better known as the either or fallacy, is when you say, it's either this or that, and you don't include the third option that there is something else. And I said, I did not do that. I made a second challenge. At most, you could say that I committed a false analogy, which there isn't because the topic is on history and had nothing to do with, what people think of these characters.
Well,
You know,
oh, I'm sorry.
yeah, I mean, there's people that deify George Washington. Like they fully believe the cherry tree thing, and all this. So I mean, I was saying so. I mean, but that's irrelevant to the actual historical data on these people. There's just different interpretations, and so I was simply making another challenge to make a point. And I told him, at most, you could commit me of committing a false analogy fallacy. I said the only way in your mind, your idiot mind, that you could say that I committed a false dichotomy is if I said either Jesus's gospels are entirely historically accurate or none are, which I did not do at all.
Yeah,
So I
but
mean,
I mean, oh, I'm
it was just
sorry.
stupid. Oh, you go ahead now.
Um, that kind of reminds me of something I read. I can try to find it really quick to flash it on the screen, but there's an actual post by somebody that was against Pinkard. Steven Pinkard, I think his name is. Atheist historian. Historian. The air quotes there. That basically a failed professor who
Mm-hmm.
is now a blogger,
Mm-hmm.
and he wrote a book that it was like Jesus about Jesus not being a historical figure, and you have like all these blog posts by historians um that was like, well, here are all the references of somebody called Jesus who was crucified by the Romans in Jerusalem, in the Jerusalem area. you know um here's accounts of you know non-Christian accounts. Here's Jewish accounts, and stuff like that. And the whole blog post was about how he pissed off Steven Pinker by saying, you know, by claiming that what's in his book is basically wrong, factually, because he said that a text said something that it didn't, basically.
Yeah.
And
It's
you
sort of like
you
a
saw
Richard
that.
Carrier.
Yeah, Richard Carrier. I'm sorry, Steven Pinker.
I, if there's anyone I despise more than Sam Harris, it would probably be Richard Carrier. He is such an intellectually dishonest man that, and he writes. If you read his blogs, he writes exactly like how I would call a Reddit atheist. Um, he is. There's no distinction. He's not a professional. He, you know, the only thing that he has going for him is the fact he has a PhD. And while that is good, there are also some young Earth creationists who also have PhDs, and I don't see atheists taking them as seriously because they have PhDs. To be funny, there are probably more young Earth creationists with jobs in relevant fields of biology than there are atheists like mythicists in relevant fields of history.
Yeah, I mean, there's. I agree with that. I can see that. I mean,
Mhm.
uh, I don't know why I get Steven Pinker and Richard Carrier confused. I really don't. I
Well, all atheist pseudo historians are alike.
Yeah, that is true. They all
Mhm.
they all talk about the same things that are not really exactly true.
Yeah,
They're just ideological statements, essentially.
yeah. Um, you know, I actually read a full debunking by a Bayesian professor named Tom Hendricks, I believe, who completely destroyed the historicity of Jesus Christ by Richard Carrier. Completely demolished it. Um, One of the funniest things I got out of it, he made a perfect point about Richard Carrier's Reglian system of probability, where he put Jesus Christ among the other pagan gods. For one, he's factually wrong on almost all the pagan gods he says Jesus is like or resembles. But two, even if it was true, the most you could conclude from that is that the people that wrote about Jesus had a specific way of writing about him, not that Jesus didn't exist. For example, if you were to read like the story about George Washington cutting down the cherry tree, the whole his like the whole biographical account of George Washington in that story is completely fanciful. If you if you really went specific into it, you could probably put George Washington into some sort of category and deduce logically that he did not exist, which is obviously ridiculous if you're going by the same system. So, I mean, all you can conclude, even if it was true, is that these people had a specific way of writing about it, not that Jesus didn't exist, which is the whole point of Richard Carrier's book. So, his Riglian system is so bad that it's not even wrong, if that makes sense.
Yes, it seems more like fiction than anything else.
Yeah,
There's another book that was pure, I think, atheist propaganda. Um,
yeah,
there's a book that was basically about how the Catholicism created, um, the Romans created Christianity to get rid to hurt the Jews, to make the Jews stop being Jews, or something like that.
yeah.
It was published in like 2012, I
Yeah.
think. Um, I saw it. It was a book I pirated, and it was so factually incorrect. I mean, it was, pure propaganda.
Yeah. To be fair, I think honestly at this point, atheists would believe in the flat earth if by some means believing in the flat earth hurt Christianity. I think that's all they're really interested. They're just interested in hurting Christianity, and no matter how insane they have to go in their beliefs, and no matter how ridiculous it has to come to, like I truly believe if believing in the flat earth hurts somehow create cause some terminal with Christian theology, they would believe it.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, there was there was a slightly long thing within atheism that atheists would completely say no, there is no Big Bang that happened. That's all
Yeah,
Catholic lies. And then later on, after we saw evidence, they stopped that narrative. Not only did they stop that narrative, but it seems like they erased that narrative from their memory completely.
yeah. George Lemaitre too. He's the one that said that. Um, he was the one that came up with the Big Bang theory, looking at. I mean, Einstein was very much against. I mean, he thought it. He was. Albert Einstein was a very complicated man. We don't really know what exactly he was because there's some quotes of him where you can deduce he was an atheist and some quotes where you can deduce that he was a theist. It's just becomes, like he's like, guys like Thomas Jefferson and Paine, where you can come to radically different conclusions based on a quote. So they're complicated people.
Well, with Albert Einstein, there's a little bit more history of him actually at least participating within Judaism. Um, I I think his wife was not devout, but they would go during the he would honor the customs and traditions. He would go during Hanukkah and Yom Kippur whenever he could, because most of his time was in, in a New Jersey university teaching. Yeah.
Yeah. All I know is this: is that Einstein criticized the atheists back then as being dogmatic and not they're just after he described it exactly as following that they are simply prisoners that after having releasing the shackles of religion still feel and being free they still want to have a fight to fight. And he said he certainly wasn't like one of them. So I think if Einstein was alive today, he would be ashamed of the new atheist movement.
I think Albert Einstein would be against the new atheist movement, especially scientism. The replacing God for science, science with God. Essentially, that's what scientism is. He would be against it. Like a lot of atheist scientists are against it. There are atheists that were like, I forget when it was, like 2000 and I, I saw the actual article 2014 2015 where there was a study and theistic and atheist scientists would just like completely bash Richard Dawkins, and none of the questions was about Richard Dawkins. Some of the were from an atheist scientist that Richard Dawkins completely misrepresents science and claims that science does more than what its scope is, because the scope of science, if you know all through grade.
Science is a tool.
Yeah.
Science is a tool that that we are very good at, and I'm not saying anything bad about it because I'm very much a science person, but science is a tool that deals with the correlations of natural events and it's a way that we come to knowing about the natural world. Uh,
Well, yeah.
to say that there's plenty of things that science can't deal with. Science, for instance, can't tell you if something is wrong or not. It's completely absent on morality. And some aesthetic truths and even some scientific claims can't be dealt with. Like, science can't tell you that you're not a brain in a vat being controlled by another scientist. You know, claims like that, science is completely outside the realms of science.
Well, anything dealing with absolute truths is also outside of the realm of science because if it wasn't right, like
Yeah.
we're so behind. We're not behind, but we're so like we're like infants or toddlers as far as our scientific progress. Even though our scientific progress has increased by leaps and bounds, it's still we're still like toddlers because we have observed everything there is to observe on Earth, let alone our own solar system, and then there's other solar systems than that. So
Yeah.
you look at everything that there is to know, everything that is to observe. We haven't even a thousandth of it is being generous. We know so little.
Yeah, no. I mean, if I could take anything away from what Hitchens said, Hitchens once said that the wisest people that I've met are the ones that say, like, how little we know. Or, how Socrates would say, the only thing I am certain of is that I am not certain of anything. You know,
Well, you
so,
really can't be certain of anything.
yeah.
To be honest.
Well, like all beliefs, they're all probabilistic. All beliefs are probabilistic based on the scope of background information. If we have to look to any belief, we have to look at the full background information and deduce what is the most logical conclusion given this background information.
Yep. I mean, and even when you're looking at the background information, and then you observe, like in quantum mechanics, for example, they use the Monte Cristo simulation model, which is essentially, a computer program that is supposed to simulate how particles interact with each other. When you get into like atomic physics and stuff like that, to actually do the applied portions, you have to do simulations first to make sure that your experiment isn't going to destroy the Earth. Essentially, because we're that's the realm of things that we don't even understand, and it could very well lead to a cataclysm. It's one of the reasons why the Hadron Collider, those experiments are very, they're few and far between as far as, it's not running constantly. They're not constantly doing, you know,
Smashing atoms.
Yeah, they're not constantly smashing atoms to see what's going on. They do it every once in a while, but they're really worried about it. They're really worried about doing it too much because there's that, there's
there's always a risk.
a whole bunch of things that can happen we don't even know, and I forget what we're talking about. I'm sorry.
Like when we were talking about probabilistic beliefs and science and atheism and how atheism can corrupt science.
Well, yes, yeah. Any ideology or belief system can corrupt science. I mean, even there. I mean, there's instances that atheists like to show of Christianity doing, corrupting science, which I'm,
like you said, any ideology, if pushed to its dogmatic, fullest, can corrupt anything. Science being a tool that we use, it's like a shovel. If you give it into the hands of someone that is a lunatic,